Recappers, good day. You know, Harvard University and emerging technologies have their own languages. Today's guest, Matt Cook of Harvard's Digital Scholarship Program, speaks both. Through imaginative 3D use from photogrammetry to VR, Matt facilitates breathtaking projects like the 3D medieval architecture exhibit, which served as the original recap. It's all done to support Harvard's students, faculty, and researchers, but also academia at large. No, really, he's literally traveling the country to further the cause. This episode is a far-reaching journey of a far-reaching person. So enjoy Matt Cook, Digital Scholarship Program Manager at Harvard University. Matt Cook, Digital Scholarship Program Manager at Harvard University Library. Welcome, sir, to the Recap Podcast.
Thanks, Ellis. Thanks for having me.
My pleasure, man. So much to cover. You were recapped in an issue that covered the capture and 3D modeling for an exhibit at Harvard entitled Envisioning Cluny, that's C-L-U-N-Y, Kenneth Conant and Representations of Medieval Architecture, 1872 to 2025. You worked closely with Christine Smith, curator, professor, and architectural historian, and I absolutely want to discuss her in a bit, but I'd like to start chronologically within that exhibit title. So for those who missed the recap or just as a refresher, what was the Envisioning Cluny experience?
Yeah, so there is a gallery space at the Harvard Graduate School of Design, kind of in the lobby. When you walk in, if you haven't been there, it's open to the public, so anyone can check it out. And they rotate exhibits pretty frequently. I would say at least a couple times per term. So they're constantly putting stuff up. And over the course of it's been at least 2 years, 3 years, Professor Smith and I worked together along with a whole host of other individuals to develop and deploy an exhibit centered on medieval architecture, first and foremost, which is her area, but also to kind of tie it all together and give it a human element. The guy that was the expert in the early 20th century, which was Kenneth Conant. So basically, there's a story of a guy's life, a medieval architect from Harvard, and he was kind of obsessed. He was focused, let's say, on this one medieval cathedral, monastery, which was in France, Cluny. And Christine studied him. She studied, the era. She understands the architecture itself. She studied Cluny, and she put it all together as an exhibit at the School of Design, which included media from the old school, so flat media like historical photography and architectural schematics, and then all the way through to our contribution, the library's contribution, which is the 3D scanned capitals. So sort of new media, so to speak. And these models are, as you probably know, extremely high quality, and they represent the sort of high-end digitization that takes place at Harvard Library now. And it's also representative of a new service. So Christine was among the pioneers in and around the COVID era that basically kicked off this 3D scanning as a service at Harvard Library. So you can imagine there's a lot of ways to sort of go with this. There's the exhibit, right? That was part of our collaboration, but there's also the individual 3D scans, which are the final, if there's a narrative thread or chronology, that's the final component of the exhibit itself. So
tremendous. Had you worked with Christine prior to Cluny?
No, that was soon after I got to Harvard. So, I got to Harvard 2019. I think we started working together in 2021 or 22 when she found out that all this stuff was even possible.
Yep.
Excuse me. She was teaching about these objects. I'm going to lift this window up here. She was teaching about these architectural objects, which are, capitals are sort of the head on top of the column that you would see it going back to the classical period. So you can look that up and do your own research and you'll learn a lot.
Just to establish, so Cluny, we're talking medieval cathedral, you said. It's essentially and Kenneth Conant,
Mhm.
Harvard student or professor, both.
Yeah, both. Yeah. So he was an undergrad, if I'm not mistaken. I have to double check my notes for that. And then definitely he was a grad student. So he got his PhD.
Okay.
So he went through he was, what they call a Harvard man. He had been
Uh-huh.
through the system essentially.
Certainly.
And he was mentored by some of the famous like early architects and architectural historians of the time. He kind of followed in their footsteps and eventually was doing, essentially excavations, which wasn't the norm for these guys, right? You could imagine there was some armchair architects and then there was some like field architects or historians. And he was kind of both, which is, if you look at the photos from the exhibit, you'll see him like in the footings of abandoned, a ruin of Cluny, I believe it is. So he was really getting his hands dirty. Of course, they all wore suit and ties. It was kind of like the Indiana Jones era when they were doing that.
That's remarkable, Matt. It's really a sort of holy trinity of, you have a meditation on a person, a structure, and technology itself. I mean, it's really staggering. What an undertaking. I'm curious, how does, from what you witnessed, shifting from Conant's sketches, his drawings, to proper, just state-of-the-art 3D modeling, shift viewers' experience and also, interpretive possibilities for scholars?
Great question. As I give you a nice cough response there, it makes more sense the more I learn about Cluny and his work, or Conant and his work, and Cluny itself. So Cluny going back in time again, it was essentially destroyed after the French Revolution, right? It was demolished. So Cluny was a part of a new school that would take what they knew and different sources, images, and drawings, historical drawings, and documents, and he would try to imagine what Cluny would have been like, even though no one in living memory by the time he was working, right, had ever seen it.
Yep.
So Cluny was long gone by the time Conant got involved. So it's sort of the same thing that we're doing with the 3D VR components, which is, how can we simulate Cluny?
Mm-hmm.
And then Conant was basically doing that, but the technology of his time, which was hand drafting, right, or architectural schematics, they were limited to single perspectives per image,
Mm-hmm.
right? So we're taking it to the next step. We're going, arbitrary viewpoints for students that can look at the scale and dimensionality, and lighting conditions, dynamic lighting conditions, and just the awesome grandeur of the inside of these monasteries from the ground, as if they were standing on the choir floor, right? So that we're kind of taking the next step. We're doing the thing that Conant was doing, which was imagining and then simulating the interior of Cluny, but we're doing it in 3 dimensions, and you can actually walk around these simulations, which you couldn't do, of course, 100 years ago when Conant was working. So what that does specifically for them, like, historical and architectural nerds and scholars out there, is that allows you to sort of hypothesize about things like, could the choir even see 30 feet to the top of the columns and read the faces of the capitals? Because they had all these intricate designs and figures. They had themes. Each capital had a different theme, and you probably saw that in the catalog, right? It was like there was nature themes and musical themes, and different things like this. If you were to place someone, for example, in virtual reality at the base of these columns, it's not clear that they would be able to see any of that. So as a researcher, like in Professor Smith's case, she wanted to, number one, explore perspective, on the ground perspective from different viewpoints within the Cluny monastery, and see how, if you rearranged or repositioned or reordered these columns and these capitals, how would that experience change for the people that would have been in the church saying mass at the time? And this is 11th, 12th century. This is early medieval. This is an old building.
It's wonderful. It's really proof how, this is so much more than just show and tell and neat toys. It's really empirical truth. I mean, you're achieving and being able to, or at least at the very least, make a better educated guess, right? I mean, you said hypothesize, and that's literally, outstanding. Overall, did you learn more about Kenneth Conant or medieval architecture from this project?
Yeah, I mean, this is something that I wanted to get across to you during our chat today, which is it's my favorite part of the job. I get to like dip my toe into medieval architecture, which is something you don't know that you want to learn, right? It's like one of these things where it's like, okay, if I'm walking down a bookshelf in Barnes and Noble, I probably walk right by it. But if you're right in the middle of it, like literally looking up at these objects or you're studying them day to day, even if you're not an expert, you're going to be impressed. So yeah, I learned a ton. I learned about the man himself, Conant. I believe his son went on to lead a religious life. So you'd seen this. I've seen this more than once and heard these anecdotes where, he's an academic. He's a scholar. He's sort of a modern man, but he's so engrossed in this like religious study, the study of religious life, the history of Cluny, for example, that it bleeds into his personal life. So, I mean, it kind of came full circle, but these are the anecdotes that I hear every day that you wouldn't really get necessarily unless you were working with this material.
We mentioned already, curator of this exhibit, architectural historian Professor Christine Smith. The nitty gritty of collaborating with her. I mean, take us through, not an hour by hour, but what was that process in tandem like working with Christine?
Yeah, I mean, Christine, she's been doing this a long time. I believe she's in maybe her fifth or sixth decade of teaching, I would imagine, at least. And she's a perfectionist. I don't think she would mind me saying that. I mean, she'll hear the podcast, of course. So, we have to be very upfront about what we both want and what we can both do. I in my earlier career, I would, want to say yes to everything. And we can come back to that maybe when we talk about the 3D scanning process itself.
We will.
Because everyone it's 3D scanning.
Don't you worry.
But when you get to know people like Christine and work with them for years, you can't risk that. Like, you need to be able to follow through on what you discuss. And this is not at all a criticism. Basically, what I'm saying is that we both have very high standards, and we want to do the best work that we can do, even if it means less work, do it better.
Sure.
If that makes sense. So, but we went up and down the line. We've collaborated on instruction on her courses, exhibit materials, 3D content, copy, text, written, exhibit materials. So we collaborated on all of that. And I hope and I believe that she sees me as a trusted sort of support staff person at this point.
I'd have to imagine that's a resounding yes after looking at this final product. But I am curious, A to Z, just timeline. How long are we talking for envisioning Cluny too?
Yeah, 3 years, I would say. I mean, she'd been thinking about it before we even met, but I would say 3 years. And the exhibit wasn't up. It might have been up for 10 weeks. We can confirm that,
Sure.
Off the top of my head, I couldn't tell you. It wasn't a super long exhibit. We did have I don't know if this was in the any of the research you did. We had a launch party with an early music, like one of these like groups that plays old instruments and sings. Like,
was this the Sound of Cluny? It's on YouTube with the Dean.
Sound of
Yes.
Cluny.
Yeah,
it was amazing. Yeah. So I mean, there was a climax, which you don't. After 3 years of work, you assume that it's just going to be done and gone, and to an extent it was, but there was like a highlight at the end of it all to like wrap it up, which is nice. Because that amount of work, and you can't, begrudge the process. Of course, there's a new exhibit lined up and people are already thinking about their next work. But we have the catalog, the 3D data, and maybe this is the takeaway. The models now live forever, online, they're accessible,
right,
and they're usable in ways that we could never imagine.
Yeah. Good old permanence.
Yeah.
And great segue too. I love if you could walk us through just a typical tech stack for a project like Cluny, from capture to model to exhibit.
I can speak of generalities. So the way that like organizationally this works is I came in with a background in sort of innovation management, makerspace management, consulting, technology consulting, like within academia, and had facilitated and advised on scanning projects, but never had to be the only guy, like the photographer, so to speak. So this is where we're lucky, because we have some of the highest end, most highly trained experts in our digitization lab, which is called Imaging Services. So I sort of bring the salesmanship and the conversation with the client, in this case Christine Smith, and the knowledge of photogrammetry and 3D scanning, and the sort of the theory on why we would do this or want to do this. And I bring Christine together with Imaging Services, and I sort of work with both parties to facilitate the output. Thank goodness I don't have to be there. It's just not my area. I don't have to be there with the camera myself shooting, right? So I'm out talking to faculty, explaining to them why, getting them thinking about 3D scanning.
Yes.
And then connecting them with Imaging Services. Now, that being said, I've been really close with that team as well, because they stood up the service, in collaboration with me when we had no standing photogrammetry service. And we had looked at and are looking at things like RTI, structured light scanning. And we can talk about that too in the future of what we would want to do with that. But right now, I mean, they have just the highest end, lights, tripods, triggering mechanisms, workstations. I believe we're in Adobe Shop completely. We're using Metashape primarily as the stitching software.
Okay.
So, and I have details on a number of images that go in. I maintain the output repository, which includes all of the input stills that go into Metashape, along with the undecimated master meshes that come out. And I'm also sort of more knowledgeable on the 3D outputs than the imaging team, because they had never done, they weren't doing 3D scanning before this COVID 3D scanning experiment began. Yeah. So we kind of have this handoff. When I have the client, the faculty member, interested, and we have a target object, then they can take over with the 2D photography and the image processing. And then when we get the outputs, I can then take over with 3D model hosting, and archiving and preservation. So that's a partnership, a pretty strong partnership. Although I'm not in that department, we're both in the main library and we work together closely. And we've done a ton of these scanning projects together.
Fantastic. So there is a legitimate ecosystem here. It's not just Matt Cook sitting in, the proverbial lab with the camera and then doing processing and then doing, preservation.
Exactly. Okay. Yeah. I mean, it's hard. It's a very Harvard thing. It's a bureaucracy essentially. There's a system in place, mostly for better, sometimes for worse. But to get into the service catalog, at Harvard Library Imaging Services, that's a huge win for us. That's a stamp of respectability, of legitimacy, of credibility for this service and for this concept. So you can go on to the Imaging Services catalog and you can look up, computational imaging, and you can find photogrammetry service, and you can get a quote on a project for doing your scanning service anywhere at Harvard.
Excellent. So from your vantage point, if someone wanted to replicate the Cluny workflow on a minimal budget, which steps or tools would be non-negotiable? Absolute must-haves.
Yeah, totally. It's gotten easier, as you know. So we started doing reference scans with Polycam with phones. So that's a thing we can do now. We can go to sites and do these sort of test scans without worrying about overcommitting resources. So that's the baseline, I think, at this point. A modern smartphone with LiDAR, and then an app, and some knowledge of photography. I think that is something that I had been lacking, that I find contributed the most to the output, which was just a knowledge of color and light and composition. These are kind of obvious things for a still image photographer. But when you're a photogrammetrist, you might not realize how important these things are. For me, like photogrammetry was all about just maximum overlap, right? From enough angles.
Yeah.
So I wanted to make sure I didn't like miss any shot. I wasn't as concerned as an, non-trained photographer with color and light, but they're color safe, in the labs. And we have actually pretty stringent criteria for what we accept as a scanning project, which I can get into. I don't know if that's like on your list.
Yeah.
But we strive, and the imaging services strives for the absolute best, highest resolution, measurable output with corrected, true to life color and scale. So,
and that is itself non-negotiable. And I ask because I imagine there are some people, professors, who maybe come to you and aren't, when they seek their quote, and that you have to make it known, like we have sky high standards and we want, picturesque results. And have you encountered any resistance to that? And just sort of, I just want something on the cheap, or can we get something quick? It doesn't have to be a Picasso. I mean,
yeah, I would say the faculty, they want the same thing. The students and the grad students may not have the resources for that.
Yeah.
So oftentimes what I have to do is sort of, push them more towards like the iPad or the iPhone scanning, which is great. Like it's good, especially if what they're trying to produce is like a game asset or an exhibit piece or some sort of one-off instructional asset rather than a scientific object of study. That my goal is to make the object, for all intents and purposes, indistinguishable from its source, its physical source, so that a faculty member can take new measurements on the scan and rest assured that those measurements are reproducible by another colleague somewhere else later down the line. That's sort of the gold standard for me, reproducibility and citability of new science that takes place on these scanned objects. So surrogates must be able to be reproducible, and the measurements that are taken on them must be able to be reproducible. That's the faculty standard that we hold ourselves to.
Harvard Library Imaging Services.
Yep.
This was born of COVID, essentially, or was there a project that just happened to pop up during COVID? Like, how was it born?
Yeah, imaging services has been around for, forever. But this service, right, the umbrella term is computational imaging or digitization, and then photogrammetry is the subservice. That came about when students, faculty, and staff wanted access to library material during lockdown. So the thing that people, and I mean, I'm still overwhelmed by it, that people don't realize is that even within the library, there's a ton of artifacts. It's not just text, like it's not just books. It's not what you would think of as a library. It's essentially a giant collection of historical artifacts, many of which are books, right? So we have entire basements and closets and rooms filled with just very, very interesting objects. Like the Historic Scientific Instrument Collection is another good example. And we have a 3D scan of this. It was one of our first. We did it during COVID. The object is a camera obscura that folds up into the shape of a book. You might have seen it in our collection. It was purchased by Benjamin Franklin in Britain to replace another camera obscura that was destroyed in a fire when the Massachusetts legislature moved to Harvard during a plague year and accidentally burned down the scientific instrument collection at the time. So just imagine that all that history sort of wrapped up in the story of this one object. And the object itself is beautiful, right?
Yeah. I mean, that's a movie right there. Jeez.
Isn't that crazy? And those are like the charismatic objects that we encourage people.
Yeah.
To
Golden. Boy, talk about when it rains, it pours, huh? Plague and then a disastrous fire. Oof.
Yeah. It was kind of like good timing for us, or at least coincidental, because we were in the middle of essentially a plague when this was happening.
How the universe works. So, Okay, Harvard Library Imaging Services, long legacy. Now, your title, if I did say it right, I mean, Digital Scholarship Program. Mm-hmm. Interplay between the two? Can you discern?
Yeah, totally. So I kind of think of what I do as a little bit more experimental, a little bit more cutting edge.
Yeah.
Imaging services, they work with digital technology. I mean, The problem with the term digital scholarship, and all of my colleagues in this area will agree, is that it's sort of meaningless because it's so broad, right? So all of these programs and all of the IBs have counterpart programs. They have specializations. So I have 3D and VR are things that I focus on, among other things. No one does everything. There's different like pathways to follow, but it tends to be things that are not super well established yet, like emerging technology. Imaging services, they can't risk as much emerging technology. They have, throughput. They have clients, they have a budget, they have staff. I'm pretty like small and agile. They have, as I mentioned, millions of objects that are just lined up, ready to be digitized. Yep. They need to be very like standardized and stable, right? So we both work with digital, quote unquote, technology, but they're different. They tend to be a little bit more experimental on my end and then more stable on the imaging services end.
It's almost like a parallel of, a proverbial startup versus a legacy company, right? And
yeah, exactly.
And pick your industry. Yeah. Wonderful. What was the most challenging part of building the Cluny exhibit?
This is one of those things where I kind of overcommitted, like, how it is, because you want to be helpful and you're interested in the work. So there was a simulation that I crafted by hand in Blender. So this is essentially a 3D modeling exercise. That's like pretty deep in the weeds. Blender can be a little bit of a black box.
Yeah, certainly.
And a deep dive. I've been working with it on and off for years, but we wanted to make a reproduction of not just one 3D model, but all of them in a scaled replica of the part of the church where they existed. So place all of them, call all of the capitals on columns, in one 3D environment that we can use in an instructional video that was in the exhibit, right? So we wanted to see in situ, essentially, perspective, all the capitals side by side. That became quite like an exercise. So this is like, it's essentially a 3D modeling, job, right? This is the kind of job you would take on like for commission if you were working in the 3D modeling space. And it's just like, it's its own thing. It's its whole other thing that like I could do, and maybe it'd be interesting to do it full time, but it didn't feel so fun when you're like doing it for hours and hours every day and you have other stuff to do. The one good thing that came out of that, and this is something that I've been doing a lot, is we had to simulate arches. Like if you look at some of the historical imagery, there are arches connecting, like stone arches connecting the top of the capitals. So they're not just columns and capitals. There's also like connections. Excuse me. Those arches, because Christine knew what she wanted, they had to be a very specific way. And I couldn't find the arch. I was having trouble modeling it, like the geometry essentially, and the texture. So I ended up going with the text to 3D AI generated model based on the description that we knew we wanted. So that was quite innovative at the time. That would have been 2022, 2023.
And that came out satisfactory? You dug it?
Yeah.
I mean, that was...
Yeah. If Christine's happy, I'm happy.
For sure.
With the sign off.
What more grand litmus test, huh? Than old Christine.
So that, like I said, that was a little bit in the weeds for me, but fun, but time consuming.
Yeah. But rewarding, I think. It clearly took things from it,
Yeah.
Matt, in the exhibit guide, you write that photogrammetry has become a preferred tool for academic departments and cultural institutions on a budget. Do you know of any other, or can you speak about any other academic departments or cultural institutions that have seen recent successful use cases?
Yeah, absolutely. So my research partner is at the University of Arizona, and we're traveling right now on a grant, looking at 3D scanning labs around the country. So the Florida Museum at the University of Florida is scanning zoological specimens, and they're using them for all sorts of simulations and instructional materials, online exhibits. I could go down the line. University of Oklahoma, my alma mater, another example of 3D scanning. They're doing Native American artifacts scanning and collaborations. We were at Arizona, and we were looking at simulations of large-scale drone based scanning projects, getting a sense of these protected wilderness areas and what that looks like to explore. We were looking at their medical facilities as well. So anatomical scanning, everything from diagnostics to veterinary medicine to, I don't want to like just be a rambling list, but like it's amazing to me how many state universities, private universities, everyone, if you look hard enough at a certain department, will have these little scanning labs. And they're using it in the classroom. They're using it for research. Same for Harvard. I mean, we have people that are doing massive human cell tissue scans within the medical school. And we're talking about, this is like data that's being published in Nature, like 1 square centimeter scans that represent, cell level visualization.
Yeah.
Of the human body. So it's from the very small to the very large. We have astrophysics and simulations that are happening at federal agencies like NASA. That an early collaborator was, simulating stellar wind collisions. That's something that got me interested in 3D early on, and 3D printing as well. So, I mean, this has kind of been my life and my world for, I would say, about a decade. And I just keep seeing more and more interesting use cases. I tend to like focus in the humanities. That's my background. And those are the people that I feel like need the most help with technology or have. So it is cool to see the tech trickle into those departments where you hadn't seen it before. It wasn't common to think or talk about 3D scanning and visualization in an English department, right? Until relatively recently. But soon after I got to Harvard, we did a 3D scan of a replica Globe Theater. So a scale model of Shakespeare's Globe Theater.
Man. Wow.
We brought it into English class. This would have been historical theater. And we had students inside the Globe Theater at human scale taking in the experience of what it would have been like to be on the stage during Shakespeare's time. So that's, we're kind of reaching the everyday student experience.
Midsummer Night's Scan. Jeez.
Yeah.
Wow.
Good world.
Far out, man. What is, or perhaps was, the 3D Frame Data Curation Grant?
Yep. So that's when I talk about traveling around the country, looking at these 3D scanning labs. You've seen it. I've seen it. Everyone has their own method. They have their own tools. Everyone you talk to probably does things a little bit differently. That's awesome because it's sort of a creative endeavor, 3D scanning. But because of the sort of youthfulness of the field, so to speak, when you get to the output side, we don't have yet the standards or the agreed upon standards, let's say, to allow, like I said, the reproducibility of some of these 3D models and their associated measurements. So what we want to do with 3D Frame, 3DF, our grant project, is to make 3D models, help make 3D models citable. We want 3D data to be, at the end of a peer-reviewed journal article, carrying the same weight as a monograph or a cited source, cited journal article. We want people to be able to cite 3D models and the measurements they take on those models as part of peer-reviewed research. And that's, not going to be solved by our one little grant. But the idea is if we talk to enough people in enough different disciplines and we take what we've learned are the best ideas, the best methods, the most defensible methods and rigorous methods, and we apply them to other disciplines, or we distill from them or extrapolate from them what's working or what's not, then we can sort of publish more standardized methodologies for others to use when they're setting up their 3D scanning processes. So they know when they're talking to faculty members, they can say, look, this is a big undertaking, but what you're going to get out of this will be as valuable as another journal article when it comes to publishing. That's 3D Frame. So the fun thing is traveling around talking to people. The sort of long-term outputs are more journal articles, more publications, but also what I think is kind of exciting and what we're working on right now, publishing, is quality control methods that take place in virtual reality and focus on 3D scans. So this is, maybe I could send you a video for the recording Ellis, but we have a vendor that we partnered with for this experiment. Essentially, it's like a scientific experiment. We're measuring how successfully people answer questions about 3D models when they're in virtual reality. So we have a set of tasks they go through. We say, identify the lower quality model, identify gaps in the mesh, identify, components of this model, and they have to walk around in VR, study these 3D scans and answer questions. And the idea is you have a checklist, long-term, you have a checklist at the end of your scanning process, and you go through looking for things that could have gone wrong during the scanning, right?
Wow.
So a student employee puts on a virtual reality headset and they go through this quality control process. And basically what we're seeing, our preliminary data shows us that they are faster in virtual reality than the control condition. So a traditional 2D monitor when they're looking at these models, and the cognitive load. So the mental sort of challenge of engaging with this content decreases. So it's actually easier mentally for people to look at these models and study them and answer questions about them in virtual reality than it is on a traditional monitor.
How long has this specific exploration been going on?
The 3D frame project started in 2024, and we've been gathering data on participants. So we go to these sites. Like I said, we travel around. And while we're asking interview questions, we're also testing them in virtual reality with these tasks, right? So this is 2 or 3 years of data that we're talking about.
You mentioned amidst your travels and everything with a research partner. Do I have that right? You said you were...
His name, Professor Alicia Katz, Zach.
Did you two sort of in simul come up with this idea, or did someone approach you with it? How did this come to be?
Yeah, so Zach and I have been working together since Oklahoma. That's where we met. And that's where I was for a few years.
And we're going to tackle, Soonerville.
Yeah, exactly.
Very soon.
Zach was a postdoc, and he's got the academic training, frankly, that I lack. He's gone all the way through the process, PhD, understands science and what can go wrong with science, which is essentially what we're studying. I'm the tech guy, right? Tech. I'm interested in tools and devices and processes and workflows. So, Zach is managing and leading the qualitative research process, the interview process, and my contribution is this quality control framework. So that's where I get to use the headset, right, and work with 3D and actually test people physically in real time. So he's, kind of advising me and guiding me through that process and working with me to gather the data and simultaneously interviewing people while I'm testing people in VR as we travel around the country. So that's how the division of work, works.
Great yin and yang. With preemptive apologies if this is just a synonym of something already discussed, the Virtual Harvard Initiative?
Yeah, absolutely. So this would have been during the COVID era as well. Part of the value of Harvard and being at Harvard is the buildings and the facilities and the architecture.
Sure.
So it just has vibe, of history, a Hogwarts sort of deal going on. People saw that value and saw also the timing of implementing a large scale facility scanning process when there was no one else around. Probably made sense. So this is essentially a Matterport, right, exercise. So we went through, I think we did every building on campus. It wasn't me personally. I helped out with the library component. So the central libraries I sort of administered and the scanning process and the scans themselves. We have many hundreds of thousands of users, recorded for our Widener, which is the main library scan. That's a virtual tour, because these are essentially private facilities. You can't just walk in, but Harvard Yard's like a tourist destination. So you want to give people something to look at, right? Or alumni, they want to see where they went to school, and that they're really the most positive feedback. They go in and they talk about how they were in this building in 1967 looking at this corner office or what have you. It's really, really amazing the level of uptake with these scans, the virtual Harvard scans.
Yeah. The power of nostalgia, right?
Oh my gosh, it's amazing.
Pretty damn unparalleled.
Uh,
Matt, have you encountered any sort of ethical limits within photogrammetry, 3D, VR, applied to cultural heritage, historic preservation, anything of that sort?
Absolutely. Yeah. Ethical and biological health hazardous challenges, which I'll give an example of both. So there is a scan that's as of yet unpublished. Two scans actually. One is at the university that I'm aware of right now, University of Massachusetts Amherst. They have their Digital Life 3D team. I don't know if you've heard of that. That's a group led by Duncan Urshick. He's a professor of biology. They're doing live animal scanning and photogrammetry of live, specimens. It's amazing.
What was the name?
And we have Duncan Urshick. The group is Digital Life 3D. They have their own website and everything. Large, charismatic megafauna, undersea creatures, scary reptiles and bugs and plants. I was able to see behind the scenes there when we were doing our 3D frame grant work at UMass. He was looking at I believe it was an elephant, African elephant, and it would have been Kenya. We can double check this, but the point is the rights to publish that data are not, given. The Kenyan government, the local government that Duncan worked with on site in Africa retains that data. Duncan is essentially a steward of that data. He facilitates the scans. He, more and more local environments and cultures rightfully are realizing the value of what they have in terms of 3D scans and recognizing that there need to be limits on publication at the outset. A lot of times things were like early on, things were just published kind of willy-nilly. So that was amazing. And immediately you just think like, I want to make this as widely available to as many people as possible. But this is like kind of a treasure. Like this is a live moving animal.
Yeah.
Captured in extreme eye detail. You want to be very careful about how you roll this out and to who and what entity is responsible for it. The same goes for a scan we did recently. It was an 8th century Chinese Buddha. I believe it was uncovered in a cave. So this is a statue in this case. Life size. And it was still in good condition with some like coloration, some pigmentation from the original.
8th century? I'm sorry to interrupt. 8th century and in pretty good condition.
Yeah. It's amazing. You can look it up on the Harvard Art Museum catalog. They own the objects. This is I understand it's an ongoing negotiation with the Chinese government or cultural heritage institution to figure out who and if and what and when this scan will be released. Right. As of right now, the idea is to provide something back to the original owner, the scan, in the absence of the object itself, because it is so old and so fragile that even just to scan it, they were under very tight control, right, to move it to the scanning location within the same building where it was stored. So, ideally they would, in some cases, ship the Buddha back to China, but it's just too risky. So again, my understanding is that a deal was made where we're going to do this service for you in lieu of shipping home the original. We're going to give you this ultra high definition, 3D scan, as essentially a consolation, but it is amazing. It's just so high quality. It's crazy. But I mentioned the sort of health and safety concern as well. I didn't realize it, but a lot of early zoological specimens were preserved in arsenic. So we had birds, for example, that we were 3D scanning. You don't want to handle them, with your hands and your skin. So, or breathe, the material within.
That harkens back to some like Radium Girls era, that whole thing with the watches. Yeah.
I mean, I see it as sort of an interesting exercise because we're documenting workflows, right? Like part of what we're trying to do is document 3D scanning workflows so people can reproduce those workflows and create the same level of quality output. Now, among our lists of metadata parameters in addition to scale and material qualities and height and weight, is health and safety hazards associated with the preservation of the object. So these are like kind of things you wouldn't think about when you just go into a collection to do 3D scanning, is that it could physically harm you if you're not careful.
Mm-hmm. So are there upcoming exhibits, Matt, that you can speak to?
Yeah, totally. Not necessarily within the Graduate School of Design. I don't know of any that are, leveraging library resources immediately. We talk all the time and work together. We will work together again. But within our main library, we're working on a public entryway space and exhibit that will have most likely some 3D components, whether that's like scale models or diagrams or interactive visualizations. Exhibits are kind of random when they occur.
Yeah.
And my involvement in them, I'm available, but I'm not always working on exhibits. It's just one of the many things,
Sure. Carousel of projects that comes through your door.
Yeah, exactly.
University of Oklahoma. Let's live there for a bit.
Yeah.
This was immediately before Harvard. Your previous role was at OU? That's the abbreviation, right? That's the colloquialism. OU? Is that right?
OU.
Okay.
Yeah.
You were head of emerging technologies for their libraries, correct?
Yeah.
What did you learn there that you carry with you today?
People skills.
Right?
Yeah. Faculty relations. I mean, what I do now, I think of informally as faculty fixer. It's like a language. I'm not like from a family of academics. I don't consider myself particularly studious, but I've learned to operate within these environments.
Yep.
You know how it is. Even if all the stereotypes about academics and academia are not true, there's some truth to it.
Sure.
If groups and communities speak their own language, so you have to learn to navigate that. And if you're talking about professors anywhere, Harvard, Oklahoma, you have to be able to speak in a calm and reassuring and knowledgeable way. And I would say the best justification and confidence booster for me when it comes to having those conversations, because what I'm essentially describing is like asking someone to go beyond their training, someone that has a comfortable career, right, that doesn't need to try anything new necessarily, right, to take a step beyond what they've always done with their teaching and their research.
Yep.
and bring in a new technology. They don't need to. They don't have to do it. So, one thing I've learned that has made that conversation easier is having my own track record of research and publication. So, like I said, I don't consider myself like a traditional academic. I'm not on the tenure track. I don't have a PhD, but I am, relatively highly cited for within my field, and write and publish a lot, including in peer-reviewed journals. And that gave me the confidence to have these conversations. So, like I said, with the 3D frame experiment, data gathering on virtual reality quality control mechanisms. So I'm seeing the process that my client will undergo, which is in the field, gathering data, analyzing that data, and publishing that data, designing an experiment, measuring the outputs, right? These are things that the people that I work for, the faculty members, they do every day. So I feel like that's like a superpower to understand and actually engage in that process myself, even though it's not quote unquote my job.
Yep.
Right. So I started doing that when I was at OU.
Would you say encountering resistance to these people that can, let's just to call a spade, play it safe, and they've earned that right, that it's more common than not to encounter resistance? Or have you been pleasantly surprised at the receptiveness to explore and get out of the comfort zone?
I've been surprised, and maybe it's gotten easier because now I have a reputation where I don't have to. I'm not like cold calling people like right, like
Yeah.
I have to do.
Yeah.
Right? People know that I can do certain things when they come to me rather than me having to search them out. So there's also like a numbers game. Not everyone, you don't have to work with everyone.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. So that's a good thing. And we've had resistance and pushback, and I'm constantly having to defend 3D and explain 3D, as a additional value above and beyond 2D imagery, for example. That's just a conversation that I've had a million times. Or like VR, for example. It is so shiny that it's hard for people to accept that there's actually value there beyond the novelty. Right.
Mm.
That's a trick to try to convince someone that it's not just hype.
So that great segue, because I was trying to think how to phrase this. The consensus rebuttal is that it's just largely unnecessary. It's just a new toy with little merit. Is that kind of what the...
Well, if you see something in the news or on TV or whatever on Facebook enough, and I'm the same way, you're naturally going to want to move the opposite direction. Like it's just you're just sort of overwhelmed with this stuff a lot of the time. You know what I mean? It's like, it feels like, you're being sold just by like the zeitgeist and during the hype cycles, at least. So you have to kind of see through that. And a lot of the like historic VR experts that I know, so guys that have been in the field for 10, 20, 30 years, they fortunately, and they may see it differently, they've lived through the downturns too, and they've stuck with it. So it's like one of those things where once you see it drop off a couple times, it's like, okay, there's something more here because it keeps coming back, number one. And number two, I'm able to sort of survive in the meantime.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. The Oklahoma Virtual Academic Laboratory.
Oh yeah.
It's just an early instantiation of more or less what you're doing now. That's something, a bit of a departure.
Yeah. I mean, I think about this all the time. So you're familiar with like Mozilla Hubs and Victory XR or, Wanda VR or any of these like VR sandbox environments. I don't know if any of that is ringing a bell for you, but like plug and play.
But not by no means a regular practitioner, but yes. Yeah.
Yeah. Drag and drop, even like a Unity, because it was built in Unity. But like this is meant to be a blank canvas for a VR classroom concept. So that oval itself is done. It's dead and gone. The concept lives on, and I'm so happy to see that we weren't like barking up the wrong tree, right? The idea is you want to just very quickly spin up a virtual classroom experience. You don't want to build an app for every class. You want to have like a baseline infrastructure. So this is essentially like a networked headset environment. And we were doing live events, years ago. This would have been 2018. We were doing, live events where experts would guide us through rock art. They would like not rock and roll, like cave drawings.
Yeah.
They would guide us through historic, like Middle Eastern architectural sites and archaeological sites. We had one with sea turtles of the world. So we would have the expert come into Oval and guide a network of headsets distributed around campus through a virtual lecture, right? And we would fly around looking at these 3D scans of these historic objects or these biological specimens. And these would be like special events, right? Like guest lectures that students could join at various locations on campus.
Wow.
And you could talk to the people, and it was cool, man. But like, the idea is it lives on, you know what I mean? Like there's still people doing this, which is really encouraging.
Yeah. It was not in vain, sir. That's tremendous. You mentioned earlier, I think it was part of your travels for the current grant that they're doing something. Was it artifact based? OU?
OU is doing 3D scans of Native American artifacts. That's right.
Okay. Now, was that through you? Is it just a quinky dink that your alma mater is taking up, or did you kind of act as liaison to that project taking off? Or
They have a 3D scanning lab, and you can look it up. My former employee, woman that I hired, Christy Wyatt, actually, with a lot, with me and with our team, we started the lab when I was there.
Right. No, I'm sorry. I'm phrasing poorly. Is it what brings you back out now after the fact? Because you started all this and the lab has been there, but you're back for the grant for the artifact project.
Yeah.
Why is that for that?
Yeah. Well, we knew Christy, and we knew that they had ongoing scanning projects. So that's one thing. It was like sort of easy connection.
Okay.
Like easy parts to go back to. The other thing is we wanted to have, and this is sort of in the justification for 3D frame, we wanted to have a range of disciplines and materials that people were scanning. So OU in Oklahoma is like kind of the center of the universe for Native American studies in a lot of ways, and tribal governments. So we knew we could see that aspect of the 3D scanning pipeline if we went there specifically. So they actually have unique objects in Oklahoma that we wouldn't see anywhere else.
Perfect. What was the Spark Labyrinth?
Oh, we're going way back.
Told you I'd do my homework, Matt.
Yeah, no, it's great. It's really like flattering. I appreciate it, Ellis, to be able to like think about this stuff again. It's not something you really like tend to do.
Yeah.
So I was in grad school at Oklahoma studying philosophy, and then sort of didn't know what I was going to do for a living, right? As a lot of us that study philosophy know.
Yep.
And I took a full-time job at the desk at the library working the night shift. So I was the circulation supervisor, just like working till 2 a.m. every night, basically monitoring like checkouts, right? In the facility. It was a lot of fun. There's some stories from those days, like, because it was a public university, you could just walk in off the street. So you can imagine, like, it wasn't all students that would come in at midnight off the street to get out, to get inside.
Yeah.
Anyways, we would do finals week. I think it was 24 hours. And there was like a lot of stress in the building. You could feel it with people studying. So this was the anti-stress solution. So meditation labyrinths, for those that don't know, it's like a guided walk-through meditation. There's a pattern of light that's projected on the floor. Excuse me. And they come from different cultures, these geometric patterns. You get spirals and different shapes like this. And you walk in and you walk out. It's not like a maze. You can't get lost. There's only one way in and one way out, which differentiates a labyrinth and a maze. And the idea is you're kind of just focused enough on what you're doing and your body is in motion that you're sort of temporarily distracted from your stress or your troubles. And you have this sort of like, not really like exercise, but like, full body motion, let's say. And the science is there. Like there's good data to suggest that just that little 5-minute walk in and out of a labyrinth with all of these cool historic like shapes and colors is enough to sort of recharge you, especially if you're sitting in front of a desk for 5 hours, like studying on your computer.
Yeah. So
we want to get students up from their desk, move around a little bit, learn a little bit of history about these objects, and then go back and continue your studies. So that was when I was working the night shift after grad school, that was the first big like project that I contributed back to the library.
What was the genesis of that, man? Had you encountered one yourself before then?
Yeah, occasionally you'll see them at like churches, right? You'll see them at like, European churches. The famous Cathedral at Chartres has a labyrinth. So you can like, there's a whole community. Like if you dive in, what I really wanted was sort of like a secular meditation experience, right? So, I don't have like a history with labyrinths or anything like that.
Yeah.
I think they're a fascinating concept. But I'm interested in like spirituality and meditation and things like this.
Yeah.
In the absence of like a chapel installation, right? To calm the students down, what can you do to get them up off their feet and to get them moving and to get them sort of distracted?
Wow.
The other like motivation for this was the grad school itself. So my training was in philosophy of mind, and basically what I learned, forgotten a lot, So don't quiz me on philosophy. But what I learned and what stuck with me is that we can modify our environments to give ourselves superhuman cognitive abilities. And this is an example of that. What can you place in the library to solve a problem with the thinking student mind, right? So we're modifying a place, and like this gets really, there's like a through line to virtual reality here, because what's the most easily customizable environment? You know, a virtual digital environment where you have complete control over what the user experiences. But if you're working in a physical environment, you can make small changes and tweaks. You can add tools, right? Or you can take away distractions, or you can add like inspirational elements, right? The Labyrinth is kind of all three. We add something, and then we help people in their thinking, in their cognition.
This is immensely fascinating. Can you, from what you recall, I know this is years and years back, the logistics and construction of this. This is a library, assuming a spacious library, but how was this and where was this installed?
Yeah, great question. I mean, it was a really quite a big undertaking. So we're talking about theater lighting. So like source 4, you know, spotlights essentially. So, you know, high lumen lights and stencils, right, in front of those lights, which are mechanically controlled via an iPad, and then a whole like scaffolding, like overhead deal. And the problem is that the projection itself, like the floor design, is proportionally scaled to the height of the projector. So we have to find a space that was quite tall. So we were in the space of the stairwell, which is kind of cool because if you look down from the 5th floor, you can see the Labyrinth at the bottom of the stairwell. And it was dark enough, like you need relatively low light conditions. But this is essentially a hardware and software prototyping exercise. So it's like software UI was like the iPad controlled, which was using theater lighting software to trigger an overhead mechanical rotating device to put different stencils in front of a spotlight. And then the like scaffolding to hang the whole thing up.
Wow. How staunchly did you have to advocate for it? I mean, was this something that we talked about, you know, the aversion some can have? I mean, was it a big battle to get this in a library? Did someone, hey, this is meant for churches, like we don't need this?
Yeah, no, I mean, not everyone understood it. You know, it's a little weird. I would say another lesson from OU, you're asking about lessons earlier, was like who to approach with ideas like this. So one benefit of working the night shift is I could see when all the bosses would go home, right? So like the dean of the library, I could see him walk out the door, and I approached him one day with this idea, and that's really what got this started. It's harder to say for everyone else to say no if the boss says yes first. See what I'm saying?
Yeah, very tactful. Because I'm also curious, and I at risk of coming off as stereotypical, but we are talking about Oklahoma, right? And I'm just, you know, such an endeavor. If we're talking San Francisco, perhaps it would be, perhaps a little more common. So, what a tale, man! That's excellent.
Yeah, good times.
What was the order in which you learned all of the emerging technologies you know now?
You know, I've always been kind of a gamer. I gave it up for years after like high school or after middle school, probably in college, but always felt comfortable with like 3D environments and console and PC gaming and all that stuff. So, you know, I was the guy that would like fix my family's computer.
Okay.
So it's never really been that big of a stretch.
Yeah.
You know, I'm like kind of in, I honestly, I feel like my biggest, and maybe you feel the same way, Alice, my biggest strength is I was born between like boomer and millennial generations. So like basically my job is to like work between those two groups, like millennial technology and like, you know, more experienced like faculty or whoever experts on the other end. So it's never really been about the technology. I don't know if that's coming through clearly enough, but like it's really a lot about facilitating relationships and understanding. You know, I love the tech. Tech is fun. Like it's like a fun component. I like the science of it probably more than
because it's so fascinating, but it is a means to your end of this relationship building. So there has to be some allure, and I guess even the gaming roots. I mean, that does certainly explain it.
Yeah.
You know that
Well, I
if
didn't learn to code until grad school. So like when it comes to like really gritty, like in the weeds development techniques, like Python didn't click for me until grad school. And I had a great class, thank goodness, where it finally made sense. I was late to the game, and like the brain, right, as it ages, has a hard time learning new languages. I think this
Mhm.
is directly applicable to programming languages. So up until AI, I was probably the slowest coder on the planet. But I was able to prototype a few cool like software widgets over the years as well. So I do feel comfortable with all that stuff. You know, I'm not like a full-time developer, but I'm comfortable talking about it and doing my own prototyping.
yeah. How do you use AI?
Yeah, I do code writing, co-writing and
Okay.
development. Primarily for like web scraping. So like pulling down data on a semi-automated basis for various stakeholders that are like searching for stuff online, or transcription. So like handwriting and document
Mm-hmm.
digitization, try to get text from a photograph into a computer that we can study. And then the latest and greatest is really text to 3D. And I think that's just like a pioneering, like revolutionary technology.
Were you to place a bet, which technology has the most promising 10 years ahead of it?
I have a working hypothesis that VR or XR and AI are the last two technologies. So I'll place my bet on those two.
Oh, like last, like we're gonna hit the great filter kind of a thing. And
Yeah, like we don't need anything else after that.
rad, great answer. First thing that comes to mind when you hear the word metaverse.
Great question. Yeah. I have I have I have good feelings when I hear the word metaverse. I think about Cyberpunk 2077. Are you familiar with that game?
Certainly am.
Yeah.
Yep.
That's I think that's going to go down in history as like an early metaverse. It's just so rich. Like I'm a big fan.
Yeah. And from what I recall, it really landed on its feet because there were some issues upon launch, right? And then some not so warm reception, but it really seems to have, yeah.
They're still launching updates. It's crazy.
Yeah.
Sorry, that's sort of like a silly answer, but
Not
I think
necessarily.
like
No.
it represents like a pot. I think a pot like metaverse has kind of become a dirty word. I think after the like in the Facebook era
Huh? Yeah.
for a lot of people.
That's exactly why I phrased that question that way.
Yeah, yeah. No,
Well
I think
done.
it's. I didn't go. I didn't get too discouraged by all that. I think it's.
Yeah.
You know
Hype can go the other way sometimes, you know? It's like,
what you think when you hear the word metaverse.
yeah, I think now I wouldn't draw immediately the cyberpunk parallel, but I think it's something yeah, I would largely be in agreement with you. I think it's going to mirror a sort of muted version of, you think about the dot-com bubble and what happened. So we all know what happened there economically, but it's not like the internet. How's the internet doing now? You know, it's like, so there's going to be rough patches, but I think it is going to be a North Star. Yeah. Upon hindsight. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
I do
just,
think there's.
I'm often reluctant to commit to anything with certainty, but that's one I feel pretty strongly about. Yeah.
Yeah. I do think there's a future for the metaverse. So beyond just like first impressions, I think the metaverse is a thing, and it's going to continue to be a thing that grows and unifies and brings more and more people.
Yeah, I would agree. If my homework continues to be right, you are well versed in embodied cognition.
Mm-hmm.
School us if you'd be so kind.
Oh my goodness. This is where the philosophy training.
Oh, and there are more philosophy questions. Don't you fret. Don't fret, man.
I think the basic idea, if I had to put it into words, would be that we're not simply, chat windows. When you and I here are talking to each other, Ellis, for example, we're using our whole bodies in many ways beyond just the coughing and the sneezing. There's also smiles and hands and sort of subtle facial gestures. If we were walking together, that might even be more noticeable.
Mm-hmm.
If I'm searching for a book in the library, in the physical stacks, they call them, right? In the collection, I'm using my whole body as a means to execute a task, which you could think of as cognitive by nature, information search task. We are essentially embodied thinking beings. We are nothing without our hands and our legs and our heads, and the way we move influences the way we think and vice versa. It's a pretty, like, when you think about it, pretty intuitive concept.
Not sure what your affinity is for movies.
Mm-hmm.
Have you seen Under the Skin by any chance with Scarlett Johansson?
If I have, it's been years.
Okay. Perhaps just add it to your list for some time. In very close proximity to what you're talking about. I don't want to spoil anything, but it's just a tremendous movie about, let's just summarize with being a human. It's also just a banger of a movie as well, but I mean, it's, yeah. I think it treats you well. What's something Harvard has, infrastructure, community, mindset, that most institutions don't, but could and should?
Another great and challenging question.
We can star that and circle back, but the other one?
Now, could and should, I think that's like the key here. Yeah, I'll speak from within the library itself. And I know a lot of universities have this. Again, this is a relatively simple service that we offer, tech lending. So we actually circulate. I have the microphone that I'm speaking to you on today as part of the checkout process. And a lot of libraries check out a lot of different random things. We do projectors, we do PA systems, we do virtual reality headsets, we do microphones, we do cameras. A lot of this is like content creation devices, which is absolutely empowering, especially for those, like, from my background, the humanities, which you don't get a lot of like laboratory equipment or financial resources. So you rely on the institution to provide you with this stuff. So to democratize new media creation and content creation, and to democratize production of new knowledge, I think some sort of like non-book lending service.
What's a contrarian opinion you hold about anything technological or educational?
There's so many, but let's try to be diplomatic. I would say,
don't you dare tantalize like that.
I VR, I have to be critical because it's like the area that I hyper specialize in. People, this is like man on the street. We're not comfortable. Us are not comfortable wearing a headset in public. There's a lot of public VR and exhibits and like spaces. It's a vulnerability thing, really. I wouldn't say that's like too controversial, but it's something that people don't give enough credit to. People talk about VR like the challenges are limited to like simulator sickness or latency or content, but I think a lot of it is like the vulnerability that comes with wearing these bulky sort of concealed.
Yeah, that's absolutely a novel observation, even if you may be right, that's not controversial per se, but that is not, I think, a common refrain in how people diagnose it, but it definitely makes sense now that you mention it. And do you think, so vulnerability in a literal self-preservation safety sense, right? Like it's, it's just
a primal feeling of being in the middle of a crowd and not being able to see if anyone's advancing towards you, you know?
Excellent. What was an aha moment in your early days of library research augmentation?
Sorry, can you repeat the
Yeah.
question?
What was an aha moment in your early days of library research augmentation?
I was surprised, honestly, Ellis, how popular and desirable a lot of these tools were from the get-go. And it was never our challenge finding users at OU, for example, that wanted to do virtual reality in the classroom. The challenge was always content. And maybe this is relevant for the reality capture network, which is how do we create the experiences if the technology is there to show them, to render them, to demonstrate it. So we immediately ran up against a good problem, which is everyone wants to do VR in the classroom, but no one has a VR app that is relevant to the thing that they're teaching. And I think that's where reality capture and 3D scanning, that's really a big exciting future for me, is like just walking down the street and pulling objects from your environment that you can use in the classroom, or you're in your research, or you're out in the field. And it's just that easy, you know?
Matt, you studied philosophy at the undergraduate and graduate level. Is that right?
Yeah.
How did that equip you for the success you've experienced now dealing with emerging technologies in academia?
Yeah, good question. Thank you, Alice. It's kind of like I said, I think about it in terms of humans as thinking agents that are as powerful as the environments they inhabit. And the environment that I work in and for, you know, libraries and academic institutions, they can be modified to support the learning and research that takes place within. And it's really about pushing forward, you know, not just the pedagogy or the methodology. It's about pushing forward the context, the learning environment, you know, the facilities, the study spaces, like we're talking about labyrinths and whatnot, navigating campuses and classrooms and dormitories and laboratories. So space sort of awareness and navigation. And then also the sort of asynchronous remote learning. Right? So how can we facilitate, again, the cognitive processes of students that are on separate continents, separate timelines, separate, you know, you name it, classes. We have to really think creatively, and we have to use tools that allow you to bring your whole body and mind into the learning experience. And that means pulling in the contents, learning objects from the real world that we may have not previously been able to or wanted to or thought about doing. It's just about empowering the minds. I think that would be the thing that I took away from those years. You can do a lot to empower a mind if you carefully shape the environment that mind is operating within.
Who's a philosopher that would really dig VR and XR?
Yeah, well, this is fascinating for me. So, yeah, there were some guys that would totally understand what we're trying to do with this. There's a French philosopher, Maurice Merleau-Ponty, and then there's another guy, sort of a contemporary, is J.J. Gibson. These are both sort of philosophers of perception. I want to say mid 20th century.
Okay.
And yeah, I don't want to, like, again, I don't want to try to dive too deep into details, but these are essentially guys that were studying the way that we perceive the world and, the extent to which we know the truth of our perceptions, or the permanence of objects.
Yeah.
Well, so these are like kind of pioneers, pre-digital pioneers in perception and verification.
Sure. From your POV, I know you're not a professor, but what is formal education's biggest contemporary challenge?
Oh man, jeez. Yeah, I don't know. Like, everyone says AI, and I kind of get it. I'm just wondering where the jobs are at. You know what I mean? Like, I wouldn't tell my kids to study philosophy, right? I think maybe you and I were the end of whatever the liberal.
What about
like,
computer science? Would you tell them to,
Now,
if they?
maybe. I don't even know what that'll look like. I worry about the jobs and the job market of the future. So how we like burden our young people, this is like, right, student loans and tuition and things like this, versus what we can promise as an expected like outcome. That's very tricky. I'm a little bit like protected from that because Harvard, I think, will have a name brand that they can trade on indefinitely.
Yeah.
Whatever happens. But like OU, I come from a different, background with them. So,
yeah.
And they're still within the state, flagship, very high research output. I think you're going to have to specialize like they have done so with energy. And like I said, Native American studies, but the challenge is still going to be job placement and what you can promise kids after they spend all this money, right, to go to school.
Are you actively involved in the digital scholarships, hiring, onboarding, recruiting aspect?
What do you mean?
Bringing aboard new blood. I mean, is it, do you have your hands in that, or is that?
Yeah, there's not a whole lot of that going on, especially now. Hiring is a very slow process. We had a team at OU, an amazing group of individuals that I work with for years. And I think small is good in what we do.
Yeah.
And I could see myself rebuilding. Right now it's, grad students and interns and student assistants rather than full-time professional staff. It's made a lot of sense because of COVID and the way I kind of bounce around from person to person and project to project. But don't get me wrong, like to have a small team, like a half dozen digital scholarship specialists or something like this is definitely the dream, because then you can like scale, right, a little bit more, a lot of this work. It's just I mostly inhabited jobs that didn't exist before I got there or I got them. So that's like hard. It's kind of hard to keep justifying that.
You're like the Ernest Shackleton of tech, man.
It's fun. Yeah, it's a lot of fun. And I'm lucky. I consider myself very lucky, but it's also like, again, digital scholarship is a good example. It's sort of an ephemeral concept.
Yeah.
And try to pin down and sell that. And like, maybe the idea is not to have a bunch of people like me running around either.
Because it sounds like, ultimately it affords you this ability to really remain nimble. I mean,
you have to. Yeah.
Well,
Harvard's notorious for silos. So best case scenario, and this happens all the time, I can take concepts from the medical school and bring them to the School of Design, or concepts from the engineering school and take them to the humanities departments. And they're just not talking. They have no reason. But, part of why I exist is so I can move between these departments and share ideas.
Yeah.
I think that fits everywhere.
You are preaching to the choir. I just got to tell you, because that is what we see it daily. And it's one of our mantras is to break down silos, essentially.
Yes.
And people, even no matter how well versed they may be with technology, it's that lack of communication. Doesn't matter what the industry is. Like, it's just rampant, So I hear you. If you could instantly master one new medium or creative skill to add to your tool belt, what would it be?
I think that 3D modeling, like I mentioned earlier with Blender.
Okay. Yeah.
It's like, I see it as along with 3D scanning, like a baseline skill set if you're working with 3D. And I also see it as like a viable career path in its own right. Now, whether or not this is like what we're talking about with AI, whether or not that's like the future, but it's just such a creative activity. It's almost like sculpting is how I see it.
Mm-hmm.
3D modeling. I find it to be like meditative and very creative. So I love 3D modeling and crafting. Something I would totally like continue with.
Mm-hmm. The path to mastery. Who's the most brilliant person with whom you've interacted at Harvard?
Oh my goodness. It's along with the collections, it's the people that you get to interact with on a daily basis are so inspirational.
I can only imagine.
Let's say Professor Smith.
Okay.
As we're talking about Cluny, I mean, just a giant in her field, knowledgeable, skilled, great writer, great eye, brave. She's still pushing her limits and the limits of the administration, well into her career.
Mm-hmm.
Could retire anytime, but continues to contribute. So definitely an inspiration for me, and has seen people come and go and seen the institution change, over the years. So I'm inspired. Just like a very strong woman, I'm inspired by that.
Beautiful. What could you give a TED Talk on that has nothing to do with your job?
Let's see. I got another great question. Man, Alice, I should have done more research on you, man. This is like going to be a little bit tricky. Oh yeah, I bet you I could speak relatively knowledgeably on, I don't want to say backcountry survival, but like amateur surveying or backcountry exploration of like the Southwest region.
Wow.
I don't know if this came up, but I have land in New Mexico that I've been sort of working on and with for a few years. So I've become sort of immersed in that. That's like my non-work. When you say non-work related,
yeah,
my mind immediately goes to New Mexico because that's my non-work mind.
What took you to New Mexico? It's
the straightest, where my property is the straightest route between Oklahoma City and Taos, New Mexico, which is in the Southern Rockies.
Mm-hmm.
So right in between, there's like essentially a little state highway that cuts the corner between the interstate. It's like a shortcut between those 2 points. And that's where my property is. So we used to drive up there and go hiking all the time when I was living in Oklahoma.
How has your definition of success changed over the years?
Yeah, great. Another great question, Alice. I'm going to be thinking about all these later as I'm falling asleep. I'm definitely more people oriented now than technology oriented. And I think we've kind of touched on this several times. It was always fun. And I thought it was a lucky opportunity to be able to work with these tools, that I probably wouldn't be able to afford outside of work. But really it's more fun now to hear the anecdotes about Cluny and ancient Egypt and Western Europe and the suburbs of Paris and, biochemical chemistry and et cetera, Shakespeare's Globe Theater, than it is to really like try the latest headset. Like I'm always like have my ear open for stories from these professors.
What's the best video game ever made and why?
Jeez, I would have, up until the Cyberpunk era, I would have said like Zelda Ocarina of Time, but now it's probably Cyberpunk. I'm kind of obsessed. Yeah.
So you mentioned it. You dropped off basically when you entered college, right? And then when did the gaming resume? Was that you said you stopped, right?
I probably was like gaming like as much as the next college guy, but I wasn't playing like hardcore for a long time until we started 3D Frame. So I couldn't even run. I didn't have a computer that could run Cyberpunk or anything like new modern games. Cyberpunk's an example. I didn't have a computer that could run it until we got a workstation with our grant to be able to test and run 3D simulations and 3D models. So we're running like high-end graphics cards on our grant workstation. And then I was able to try out some of these games that I hadn't been able to before. It's just like expensive to get into modern PC gaming,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? So I was able to like get in and try these out, which things that I just hadn't. So it was like Steam sale, right? Something like that.
Yeah. So let's actually extrapolate a bit. I mean, you have this gaming background. You're well versed in VR. Are those two going to merge? And I'm talking about the specific niche of gaming and really take off. Like I feel like there's been whispers for years, but it's just not quite had the to the moon moment. Do you see that coming down the road for gaming and immersiveness and the like?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm thinking about John Carmack, demoing a Doom VR experience on the DK1, I think it was, and that was, I think when he did that, I sort of started paying attention. This would have been 2015, 2016 probably. But for me, every like year or two, I'll see a game in VR where I'm just like, everyone should play this. I think Beat Saber was one that got people really into thinking about it.
I had the same experiences, man, but it just seems like it just has yet to catapult as one would have expected by now, I think is fair to say.
Yeah. Yeah. Maybe kids can't afford VR headsets, or maybe it's not on the parents' rate, You do see it like growth though with the like numbers. Like Quest 3 for me was a revolutionary device.
Mm-hmm.
Like pass through.
Mm-hmm.
I can't say enough. At the time, I was just like, oh, there's another model out. Who cares? Now, in retrospect, the jump between Quest 2 and Quest 3,
sure,
and pass through fidelity and stability and clarity, I'm just like, I think that is going to be maybe that'll be your takeoff point, Ellis, when people look back, just in terms of like the platform.
Yeah. Yeah, it's viable.
Not that there's like a killer app necessarily yet, but like that was the point where like maybe developers started to see the capabilities.
I think it's fair to say that was a market, an inflection point. Yeah. We're wrapping up, Matt. I'm just curious what most excites you for the rest of this year, give or take. Call it near future.
Yeah, for sure. So I have some big 3D projects going. We have 3D Frame, which I mentioned, which is quality control.
Yep.
We have an immersive showcase, which is a virtual classroom modeled on our great reading room. So imagine a big, open, like cathedral-like space with all of our most impressive 3D scans, like the camera obscura, together in one place. And students and faculty and experts are able to join anytime on desktop or in their headset and explore these objects and have conversations and visit live events, participate in live events. We're calling that the immersive showcase. So imagine like an always on virtual classroom set in our most beautiful facility. That's coming online this fall. So I'm really excited about that. There's another project, like a more experimental project called Auto-Tune. You may have as a play on the word like auto-tune, like the musical plugin. This is exciting for me. So one of my like regular faculty collaborators, Professor Dear Manuelian, he's an Egyptologist, studies on the Giza Plateau. So you can imagine the history there. They have excavation diaries from the early 20th century describing every dig that they did from like 1910 to 1930.
Wow.
Plus, and they have day by day, what they uncovered, artifacts, skeletons, pottery, sarcophagi, and what they took out of the ground. So I'm taking those handwritten journal diaries and feeding them into a text to 3D AI pipeline and creating these, what I think of as word clouds, but they're actually 3D objects that circle the user in virtual reality, and they represent what was described in the diaries. So every reference to a physical object or artifact in the diaries from the early 20th century is put into VR environment as a 3D object using AI. So it describes like, you kind of get what I'm saying here. Like you have like this like broken pottery of a certain color and texture. You can describe that to the computer, and then it'll give you a model with texture. And you imagine if you had a year's worth of diary pages. So 365 diary pages. How many references there's going to be in those pages? Imagine if you could visualize an entire year's worth of data in real time in virtual reality.
Yeah.
So thousands of 3D objects circling the user, and you're distributing them based on their excavation date, based on their prevalence. So you could have some objects that are larger or smaller based on how many examples were found at the site. You can distribute them based on their semantic similarity. So if there were similar descriptions used in describing the objects, you could group those in 3D space. So think about it as like, again, a word cloud, but instead of words, the words are objects.
Yeah.
And they circulate the user in 360 degrees. So the idea is to make new discoveries about the contents of these excavation diary pages. I call that auto-tomb.
Auto-tomb. That is astounding. Whew. Well, Matt, I feel like I got an education that Harvard itself perhaps could not even offer. Thank you. Thank you, Matt, so much. It's been equal parts illuminating and frankly inspiring, man. So thank you for Cluny. Thank Christine for Cluny as well. And thank you for being on the Recap Podcast, man.
Alice, it was great. Great conversation. Can't wait to see the final cut. Really appreciate you having me.
Pleasure and a half, man. Take care.